Let me ask y'all something, right? How many of y'all are fans of the hip hop subgenre horrorcore? Now, for those who don't know the definition of horrorcore, horrorcore is a subgenre of hip hop music based in horror themed lyrical content and imagery. And here's a list of some of the artists y'all might know that were considered horrorcore artists, right? You got Ghetto Boys, The Grave Diggers, Insane Clown Posse, Tech Nine, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Eminem, Kool Keith, and the list goes on. You got Flatline. They got a whole bunch of other people, right? But look, Kool Keith, he said he actually was the inventor of horrorcore, but we're gonna save that for another show, right? But like I said, there's more artists that rap horrorcore, but have y'all heard of the artist named Big Lurch? Big Lurch probably has one of the craziest stories that I have ever heard. And I have y'all like, what the? It's a crazy story. I ain't gonna waste no time. Let's get into the story now. Big Lurch was born on September 15th, 1976 in Dallas, Texas. Now, growing up, by the age of 7 years old, he used to like to write poetry. And he wanted to be a rapper because, you know, hip hop was starting to become popular during that time, and it had a big influence on the youths. Now, by the time he hit his teens, at the age of 15, he started to take rap serious and would rap over other artists' beats, which led to him doing a lot of shows in the city, and he was going by the rap name then G Spade. But as he grew and got taller, becoming 6'7" in height, he started going by the name Big Lurch, in which he got the name from his friends because of the show called The Addams Family. If y'all remember that show, they had that butler named Lurch. Now ready to take his career to the next level, he ended up moving to Vallejo, California, the Bay Area. Plus, his father was already living there, so he just jumped at the opportunity. Now, once he got to the Bay, he ended up meeting a rapper named Mac Mall, who introduced him to a producer named Mike Mosley. Now, see, Mike Mosley was well known in the Bay Area for doing some work with E40. He did some work with Mac Dre, Mac Mall, Sibo, Selly Cell, Richie Rich, and the late great Tupac Shakur, and the list goes on. Now, around that time, he met Big Lurch. Big Lurch, he was sleeping in somebody's garage, and he felt bad for him, and he wanted to help him because he had talent. In 1996, Lurch finally got his break and ended up featured on E40's song called Record Haters. He was also on a song called How We Comin' with RBL Posse and Mystical. And he did Break 'Em Off with rapper Sibo. After that, that's when producer Mike Mosley created the group Cosmic Slop Shop with Big Lurch, Rick Rock, and Dooney Baby. And they ended up getting a record deal with MCA Records, releasing their debut album titled The Family in 1998 with the single called Sinful. But see, the album, it didn't really sell, and the group, they split up. And everybody went back to doing their solo careers. Now solo, Lurch, he started putting out mixtapes in the streets trying to generate a buzz and make some money, but the results were slow. But he did do a song with the late great Mac Dre, rest in peace to Mac Dre, called Fire, which was dope. But in 2000, while heading back to Texas for his grandmother's funeral, one day after his birthday, Big Lurch ended up in a bad car accident after a drunk driver hit him head on, and he ended up with a broken neck. After almost dying and being in a coma, he had a hard time dealing with the pain, and he was still hurting even though they gave him morphine but he had severe nerve and spinal damage though. I mean, the pain was so bad, he said sometimes it would just knock him to the ground when it hit him. And when he was released from the hospital, he ran out of his morphine prescription, and by this time he was addicted to it. That's when he tried the drug PCP to help ease the pain, just to feel numb. And during that same time, that's when a lot of record labels started reaching out to him to sign him and just wanted to help him get back on his feet. And he ended up signing with Stress Free Records, which was owned by a guy named Milton Grimes. Now see, Milton Grimes, actually, he was a famous lawyer that got his fame from the Rodney King case. And he convinced Big Lurch to sign with him after telling him he was going to hook him up with Roger Troutman Jr. Now, after signing with Stress Free Records, Lurch began working on his album, but in the interview, Big Lurch said that he didn't like the atmosphere in the studio because he was a blood gang member. And Milton Grimes, even though he was a lawyer, had too many Crip gang members in the studio, and they was trying to bully him and make him uncomfortable in the studio. That's when they started bumping heads, and he was trying to get off the label, so he left. He bounced, and he went back to Texas. Now, when he got back to Texas, Lurch wanted to do his own thing in the music game, but he needed money. So to put his music out, he had to go back to hustling and selling drugs, but he ended up catching a drug charge and was sent to jail. After bailing out, Milton Grimes reached out. Milton Grimes from Stress Free Records, the label he was signed to, told him he can help him with his case because, like I said earlier, he was a lawyer. And plus, he wanted Big Lurch to come back to the studio and record for the label. After giving him another chance, they started working together again, but it was the same old problems with the gang members. But this time, his life was being threatened and all kinds of stuff. Now stuck in a contract and stressed out, that's when Big Lurch started hustling again, but this time, he didn't go back to Texas. He stayed in Cali. He started hustling in San Francisco, and he had dope houses and everything. And he was running with a gang. But see, his gang, he was hanging out with friends who smoked Sherm though, aka y'all might know as the drug PCP or angel dust. Now, what is PCP, right? Let's see what PCP is. A hallucinogenic drug that can alter the user's reality, mood, and thought patterns. It can be sniffed, swallowed, or injected. It can also be smoked if a cigarette is dipped into or sprayed by liquid PCP, and it can make people feel invincible, engage in violent behavior, or do something to hurt themselves. Now that y'all know what angel dust is, because see, at the time, the only drug Big Lurch did was smoke weed. He didn't even drink alcohol. And in order for him to fit in with his gang, he did PCP when he was with his boys one night. They was having a party at their dope house, and they just kept giving it to him and giving him more and more of it. Next thing you know, Big Lurch was in prison for the rest of his life. Because on April 10th, 2002, Big Lurch was charged with murder and aggravated mayhem after killing his 21-year-old roommate's girlfriend, Tanisha Sace, in the apartment they all shared together. Now, the story goes on that April 10th, 2002, in the afternoon. Now, according to reports, this is what they say. They say Big Lurch went to the apartment that he shared with his roommate and his girlfriend, Tanisha, who was a beautiful, inspiring model who went by the nickname Pocahontas. And Tanisha's 2 kids was at school at the time, and her boyfriend wasn't there either. So she was there all by herself at the apartment. Now, they say Big Lurch still high off PCP, he knocked on the door, and before she knew it, he pushed his way into the apartment, knocking her down. And that's when she started screaming, and he beat her until she was quiet. And then he started looking for the PCP but couldn't find it. And that's when they say he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest. Then he sliced open her chest, grabbed her right lung, snatched it out with the other organs, and began to eat it. Wow. Now, after that, he then took all of his clothes off, ran down the street, and that's when Tanisha's friend, Elisa, saw him naked and covered in blood, standing in the street, staring and yelling at the sky. And she called the police. Now, when the police got there, they say Big Lurch growled at them like a dog, and they arrested him. After they arrested him, her friend Elisa ran into the apartment to make sure Tanisha was all right, and broke down when she seen the condition of her. And she was barely recognizable, she said, because her chest had been ripped open and she was missing her right lung, and a 3-inch knife blade had been broken off near her left shoulder. Now, when the coroner examined Tanisha's body, she had multiple stab wounds, her neck and jaw were broken, teeth marks were found on her face, and she had a fractured eye socket. But check this out though. They also say they found a large amount of PCP in her system, but she didn't do no drugs. She didn't even do drugs. And according to the medical examiner, she had so much PCP in her system that somebody must have poured it down her throat. And it ain't no way that she could have smoked that much PCP. But see, then they examined Big Lurch after they arrested him, and they found blood and pieces of human flesh inside of his stomach that matched Tanisha. Now, here's the crazy part. Big Lurch said when he came to and sobered up and the PCP finally wore off, he didn't even know that he had been in jail for over 2 weeks and don't remember anything. He said the only thing he remembered was smoking PCP and thinking that the world was ending and that he had to find and kill the devil. He was so out of it. Come to find out, he done stood in front of the judge and had been arraigned and everything. And that's when he found out that the person that he was beefing with at the record label, the owner, Milton Grimes, took on the case as his lawyer. And Big Lurch didn't have a problem with that. He's like, okay, because this is a famous lawyer that helped Rodney King, so he trusted him. Now, when him and Big Lurch started going over the case, he wanted him to plead insanity so he can get out in about 2 years. But here's the thing. California doesn't recognize that when drugs are at play, that plea comes off the table. You can't say that you was intoxicated or on drugs and that's what made you commit a murder in Cali, thinking you're going to get off. Now, he also told Big Lurch they need to make the case look as bad as they can to get him in a mental hospital. And look, Tanisha's boyfriend also testified that him and Big Lurch was getting high off PCP that day before the murder. And when Big Lurch went to court, man, they used his lyrics against him because of his rap style was horrorcore. The songs he had out, matter of fact, he didn't even have these songs out. They played these songs in court. Texas Boy and I Did It To You, where he raps Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, and all your friends, I'm fenced to school ya. They played those lyrics in court to that song, I Did It To You. And the crazy part is those songs weren't even released yet. his lawyer gave it to the prosecutor. Wow. You know what? I remember they did the same thing to West Coast rapper X-Rated back in the day. Back in 1992, they used his lyrics and his album cover as evidence against his murder. But anyway, plus, look, Big Lurch's lawyer didn't get him any casual clothes to wear in court. He had him walking out. He walked out in the courtroom looking all crazy like a psycho killer, which didn't help the case, and told him not to take the stand. Now, with all the witnesses and police testifying against Big Lurch, it only took about 30 minutes to sentence him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, because the judge ruled that being under the influence of PCP did not constitute being insane. They was trying to give him the death penalty at first. Now, later on, after his conviction, Big Lurch, now with a clear mind, he started speaking out about how his lawyer set him up and didn't tell everything what had happened or present all the evidence. That's when the real stuff started coming out, like the fingerprints found on the knife didn't match Big Lurch, because they did find somebody's handprint with Tanisha's blood on some things in the house, like a little kid's scooter that was used to hit Tanisha in the back of the head. That blow to the head is what really killed her. See, none of this was presented in the trial because they had Big Lurch on psych meds and all types of medication. And they made the witnesses get up there on the stand and lie. And Big Lurch also said his lawyer didn't bring up the fact that his pit bull dog was in the house. And they do chew and eat things with blood on it. And that could explain why Tanisha's lungs and body parts was chewed up. Also, the teeth marks on Tanisha's body didn't match his. And as far as them finding pieces of her flesh inside of his stomach, when he was high, he probably thought it was a piece of food or something. Now, Big Lurch also stated that after he was convicted, his lawyer, Milton Grimes, never answered any of his phone calls. And he also said he believes that the friends who were there that day when he was so out of it planted that stuff on him out of jealousy. Now, here's another crazy fact. They never found Big Lurch's clothes in the house that he supposedly took off. Plus, that house where they had that party at, where all this stuff went down at, it was a dope house. It was a trap house. And why didn't they find all the guns and the drugs that were on the table and bring that up in court? And somehow the house was cleaned up and all they found was Tanisha's body. And he just feels he was set up by his lawyer and friends, and the real killer is free. And now he's in prison, and because of his cannibalism charge, he said everybody's trying to harm him in prison, from police to gang members. Now, a year later, after Tanisha's murder, her mother, Carolyn Stinson, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Big Lurch, his bodyguard, Stress Free Records, Death Row Records, and Tanisha's boyfriend, claiming that those record labels had provided Big Lurch with drugs to encourage him to act out in an extreme violent manner so as to make him more marketable as a gangster rap artist. They had Death Row Records in the lawsuit, but Suge responded saying he don't know Big Lurch. Nobody from his company knows him, and he never even heard him rap. Because at the time, I guess Big Lurch was saying that he had a production deal with Suge or something, but Suge Knight was later dismissed from that lawsuit. And you know what? From the beginning, Tanisha's mom, Carolyn Stinson, always believed that Big Lurch was set up, and the real killer is Tanisha's boyfriend, because he used to beat on Tanisha, and the day all this happened, she had all her stuff packed and ready to leave. Wow. Now, her mom also says there was evidence like bloody footprints fingerprints on doors, bloody fingerprints, a shoe at the back door. And it's like, where all the evidence go? It was DNA. Whose DNA was it? And you know what happened? They told her the DNA came up lost. Now, Carolyn Stinson also believes Big Lurch didn't have a fair trial, and he deserves another chance because his lawyer didn't even get a statement from her, and she was willing to take the stand and say Big Lurch was set up. And you know what? She went to visit Big Lurch, and she told him she knew he was set up, and she forgave him for her daughter's murder. And to this day, man, Big Lurch is still fighting to get another appeal because he appealed it one time, but he was denied. And it's just kind of hard for him to get a lawyer to take the case because of his cannibalism charge. Nobody want to touch it. You know, Big Lurch also said the prison system too, man, was upset with him, all because of the TV show called Drugs Made Me Do It. They did a story on him, which was done without his permission. It kind of made him look bad on that show, man, to be honest. But he was also featured in a movie called Rhyme and Punishment, a 2011 documentary that chronicles hip-hop artists who have been incarcerated. In 2004, Stress Free and Black Market Records put out that album he was working on back when he first signed with them, titled It's All Bad, which was originally called The Puppet Master. That's what Big Lurch named it, but they changed the name. I mean, they changed the name to It's All Bad, and then they had an album cover picture of him holding a skull on a platter, in which they used that in court against him. Wow. Now, Big Lurch also doesn't like the fact that his lawyer and record label is making money off his music still to this day, instead of giving it to his family. And you know, it's crazy, man. Right now, Big Lurch is just still in prison, man. He's writing books and he's still doing music, he says, and he's just keeping his spirits up in prison and becoming closer to God. So make sure, check his music out, man. It's online, and see what y'all think. You know, it's the horrorcore genre. If y'all like that kind of stuff, support him. You know, I don't know, y'all. This a crazy story, man. What y'all think? Does he deserve another trial now that he is sober and able to defend himself and really tell what happened that day? I know, you know, rest in peace to Tanisha Sace, and just pray for her family as they continue to find out the real story about her death, you know. So, and y'all stay tuned for more episodes back with the Price of the Famous.